thanks for being here. Each of our visitors will explain his or her ideas and hold forth for up to 10 minutes at the outset of the program. That'll take up about half of our time. Then we will open it up to questions from the floor, so I hope as you listen you jot down a few things that you would like to ask any of our visitors. And when we get to that point, could you please stand and make it clear who you're asking your question of. In the final 10 minutes or so, if time permits, and I hope it will, these characters will step out of character, so to speak, and you'll have a chance to ask them some questions about preparation. I should also mention we have some evaluation sheets, which I gather are orange at the end of the whole process. Could you please fill them out? We get a grant for doing Popcorn Forum each year, and in order to keep the money flowing, we need to hear from you how good this kind of program is. So, our first historical visitor was a professor of education at the University of Southern California for more than 20 years in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. He wrote more than a dozen books on love and human relationships, often reinforcing his message by hugging members of his audience. Dr. Buscalia's books have been translated into 17 languages and sold more than 15 million copies. Please join me in welcoming the Doctor of Love, Leo Buscalia.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Michael. How are you all today? What a glorious day to be here in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho with you. It's just fantastic. The Popcorn Forum this year, contemplating the human spirit. It sounds so heavy. The human spirit, contemplating. But really, we're all human. All we have to do is look to ourselves. We can contemplate without a single problem in the world. I'm Felice Leonardo Buscalia. I probably don't need this. Felice means love and peace and happiness in Italian, and my mama named me. She knew what she was doing. But people called me Phyllis, so I go by Leo. You may call me Leo. My last name, Boxcar, Buscalia, just about anything, and I'll answer to it. I was a professor at the University of Southern California. I wanted to start a class on love. I went to the dean and I said, let's have a class on love. And at first he thought the idea rather strange. But we got together, a small group of students and I got together and we rapped about love. I learned more from them than I taught them, I'm sure of it. And after a time, I wrote a book, and the name of the book was Love. I searched copyright. I thought, well, certainly that name has been taken. Certainly love could not be left. And there was love and will, there was love and philosophy, there was love and hate, there was love and war, love and peace, but not love. And so I have the copyright for love. It doesn't bother me then. I've sat with people and talked of love, and it doesn't bother to go somewhere and speak about love. And if you think that's crazy, well, I don't care. I think it's wonderful. The crazier you think I am, the more leeway that gives me for any kind of behavior that I wish to have. I like to collect definitions of love from children, and I have a number I'd like to share with you today. Here's one. It concerns me a little bit. Love is when my mother spanks me and says it's for my own good. I wish she didn't love me so much. Here's another one, and you'll see the wisdom in this. Love is important because if it weren't for loving each other, there wouldn't be any people. Isn't that profound from a young child? And then this one is just too much. My tortoise fell in love, but it made him tired, and he went to bed for 4 years. I think love makes you tired, this child said. Corinthians had a beautiful definition. I'm sure that you remember this. It ends, faith, hope, and love. These three, and the greatest of all is love. The greatest of all. Mother Teresa will be here later in the week. Love is a fruit in season at all times and within the reach of every hand. Isn't that marvelous? Within the reach of every hand. All we have to do is reach out and grasp it, and love is ours for the taking. Many people, though, think that love has to somehow be some perfection. A friend of mine searched for a perfect love. His search was an obsession, and he left his wife and child of many years and went out to find his ideal love. Since making this decision, he has courted over 17 women, and he seems to brag about it. He seems very proud of it. And when we ask him what he's so desperately seeking for, he can't really answer this question. What is the ideal mate? It seems to me that he's only going to be happy when he marries himself. Perfection is not a requirement of love, but honesty is. Thomas Jefferson was here this morning, and he said, honesty is the first chapter in the book of wisdom. He said some other things this morning I'd like to respond to later. Love is a learned phenomena, though. It's when we ask for love less and give it more that the basis of human love is revealed to us. The essence of love is getting out of oneself and into other people. Think more about their happiness, their security. Think more about their feelings. What do they honestly care about, instead of thinking, what is right for me? What do I want to get out of this situation all the time? And you will find the true power of love. R.D. Laing, the wondrous psychologist, has said, we think much less than what we know. We know much less than what we love. We love much less than what there is. And to this precise extent, we are much less than what we are. You are wondrous human potential. You have not realized all the things you will be. Don't miss it. Don't miss you. Have you become you? Have you seen yourself lately? You know, human potential is limitless. We've never been able to find a limit to human potential. You can touch like you've never touched before. You can see like you've never seen before. Feel like you've never felt before. Do as you've never done before. And when you're done thinking and doing and feeling in new ways, you'll recognize what it is to really come to the sense of the word love. You'll realize that you are an us. I met the Dalai Lama once. Talk about faith and love. All of us sort of melted in his wondrous gaze and his presence. You know, if there's a man with a right to be bitter, he has it. But he said, our greatest duty and our main duty is to give to others. And then he smiled a bit and he said, and please, if you can't help them, would you just not hurt them? Don't hurt others. Don't make them sad. Don't make them cry. Not that there's anything wrong with tears. I know when I'm correcting my students' papers many times, they know that I care because there's tear stains on the pages. Men don't cry. I'm not going to be put into that box and have no feelings. You have to let out. I remember sitting around my table. I learned so much from my mom and papa. And we sat around my table when I was young, and my papa didn't know where the food was going to come from next. And I know some of you have had that feeling. You know what it's like to be hungry. And we were sitting there wondering, where is our next meal going to come from? And he said, don't worry. And Mama said, she told us stories like it was worse before. Like when she came from Italy and she had to stop at Ellis Island. She had a little bambino in her arms. It was my brother. And he had the measles. And so my papa had to go on to Los Angeles. And here was this woman with a bambino in her arms, and all she knew was that she had a ticket for Los Angeles, and her husband was gone already to Los Angeles. He had already taken the train across country. And she knew not a word of English and knew not a friend in this country. But she had hope. She had faith. And eventually, 2 weeks later, they put her on the train. Do you want to hear a beautiful story of love? Papa waited at the train station for every train that came from New York for 2 solid weeks until finally he met her at the station. They were in Los Angeles together. And she did not know he would be there, but somehow I think she did know. But we would cry when we heard this story. Poor Papa! Poor Mama! Oh, Papa, waiting for the train, not knowing if she would be there or not. It made an effect on us. We knew what it was like to experience that pain. Papa and Mama taught me so much, how to love, how to feel, how to have hope. This morning, I heard a man, Thomas Jefferson, a man I very much respect, a great man, talk about other things. Reason and not emotion? Postpone love till later? Till when? When will we postpone love until? How many problems in this world would be solved if we just started loving now? Why? Why would we wait? He said, the complete man is above pain and above pleasure. Above pain, above pleasure. We don't have a choice. We're human beings. We have to have pain. We have to have pleasure. This makes me crazy to hear him say these things. You won't be fully human until you experience the pain and experience the pleasure, and then help each other with it. Norman Cousins was told he had 2 months to live, and he was going to die. And he said, I won't die. And he didn't die. He looked to humor to help save him from his own mortality. And then he taught others to do the same. Norman said, the capacity for hope is the most significant fact of life. It provides human beings with a sense of destination and the energy to get started. There aren't enough models of love in this world. No one wants to teach it. Most people want to ignore it. The medical profession doesn't want to have anything to do with it. Novelists twist it. Hollywood perverts it. Scientists do all but ignore it. It's up to us. It's up to us to be the models of love. I'm curious, when are we going to listen to people who say that they want to know of love? We are these models of love. It's time for us to give. Give to each other. And you say to yourself, well, what do I have to give? I don't have enough. Or you say, giving is so hard. I don't know how to give. You can give. Let me tell you a story. I was on an airplane. I spend a lot of time on airplanes. I see so much. I learn so much from people in airports and on airplanes. And a stewardess on an airplane came up to me and said, I'm really glad you're here. I really need to talk to you. And I said, okay, I'll be here. And so when the service was done, she came back and she sat down and she just poured her heart out. Her kids had problems, and her husband was fooling around with someone else. And the job was overwhelming, and all of these problems just welled up, and she cried, and her tears came forth, and she looked at me, and I couldn't say a thing. And when she got all done, after 20 minutes of talking to me, she said, thank you so much. You've helped me so much today. And I said, thank you. Sometimes it's all that people need is an ear, something to hear, someone to hear them, a friendly voice. That's all they need. My papa gave away half of everything he had. He was not a wealthy man. He was a very poor man. And I remember when I was young, he would give away the zucchini out of the garden. You know, something about Italians. They have these gardens full of plants. We make food every night, but he always had more. He always had more zucchini. You put one seed in the ground, 5 million zucchini come up. So he would give away the zucchini. He would go down the street and he would knock on the door and he would go in and he would say, here's some zucchini for you. And then the kids would come to me in the back alley and say, if your papa doesn't stop bringing that zucchini to our house, we're all turning green. And I would go to him and I would plead, Papa, don't bring the zucchini, don't bring the zucchini. He says, oh, it's all right. Felice, everyone loves zucchini. But people remember that. Years later, people would talk to me about how these gifts meant something to them. And so even the smallest things. I've known people in this life, if they only had a picture on the wall or the shirt on their back, you wouldn't dare admire it because they would give it to you. And yet, before you leave this room, think about what you could give others. Think about what you could give the person next to you. It's so important. It's so important. It's so simple. Love isn't so difficult. It's about giving to other people. Thank you very much. I very much appreciated being here today and talking to all of you.
Thank you, Dr. Bruscalia. Our next distinguished guest lived nearly 600 years ago. She died at the age of 19 when she was burned alive at a stake in the marketplace in Rouen. She had done and said many things to antagonize her English captors. Nearly 500 years after that, she was canonized as a saint in the Roman Catholic Church. Please welcome the woman who is known in French as La Pucelle d'Orléans, Jeanne d'Arc, and in English as the Maid of Orleans, Joan of Arc.
Hello, je m'appelle Jeanne d'Arc, ou La Pucelle d'Orléans. My name is Joan of Arc, or as many have come to call me, the Maid of Orleans. I must apologize for my attire today, but this is all my captors will allow me to wear. For I have been held captive for quite some time. I spend my days in a cell, a cold, dark cell, and I spend my days in prayer. I only leave my cell when my captors come to call, for I am on trial. But before I tell you from where I come, let me tell you where I am going. I was born in the year of our Lord, 1412, in a small French village called Domremy. My village, like many others, had been ravaged by the English for 3 generations. I was witness to rape. I was witness to the torching of the buildings, the fields set ablaze. In my village, my people are starving. The English steal our livestock. They torch our fields. As a child, I'd always felt the love for the people who suffered. When I was 13 years old, something miraculous happened to me. I received voices, the voices of Saint Catherine, Saint Marguerite, and Saint Michel. They came to me and they told me that I had a purpose, that in this vast land of destruction, there should be hope, and that I should help the people find that hope that they had lost. I often work with the poor. I help feed the children. When I was 17 years old, my voices told me I had a mission. And at that point, I went out into France and I would change things that everyone knew. I left my village of Domremy and I went to Bandricourt, where I met with the governor of my province. He turned me away thrice. He did not believe that I had a purpose. I was coming with the love of God. I was coming with the hope of the people. My piety finally won out. Robert of Domricourt wrote a note and sent me with safe passage to Chinon. At Chinon, I met the Dauphin, the man who was to be the true king of France. See, the English had always claimed that they held the true throne of France. But the French people knew. We knew that Charles VII was the true king of France. But we had been ravaged. We had lost hope. When I arrived at Chinon, I told Charles, I have come in the name of our Lord. I have been sent with love from our Lord. I will help to put you on the throne, and I will help to rid France of the English shackles. Charles gave me an army of 10,000 men. I looked at that army, many of them starving, many of them fighting. They followed me. They believed in the hope and they believed in the love. They followed me to Orléans. And at Orléans, we were to lay siege. For the English had laid siege on Orléans. Orléans sat on a river, the Loire. That river in many ways separates the north of France from the south of France. The north of France had been in English control for those 3 generations. If we were to take Orléans, we could seat our king on the throne. Before we lay siege to Orléans, I made provisions for the starving people of Orléans who had lost their food to the English. Then I sent note through a squire, because I cannot read or write. I sent note to the English asking them to leave peacefully. They scoffed. They called me a whore. So we went to war. Our victory was bittersweet, for we took Orleans, and we ridded Orleans of the English. But as I walk through the battlefields, I look into the eyes of the dead. I see their limbs strewn across the field, their armor washed in blood. And I wept openly, for these men died for their king. They died for their country, and they died for their Lord. I prayed for their souls. We left Orleans, and I escorted Charles to Reims. In Reims, Charles was crowned the King of France. At the coronation, I held my banner, for my banner had lilies, and God holding the earth with two angels on either side. It represented the hand, the holy hand that had lifted Charles to the throne of France. Since that time, I went to battle. My armies became smaller. My support from Charles became weakened. False treaties were made, and some of my battles were lost. At Compiègne, I was taken by the Burgundians. Those Burgundians, they're French, but yet they have been allied with the English. They took me there and turned me over to an ecclesiastical court. Me, a 19-year-old girl who has done everything in the name of her Lord, has been on trial in an ecclesiastical court, being questioned by men of the cloth, men who have spent their lives dedicated to the Lord, but men who do not believe what I believe. I have refused to answer questions. There are things that only my Lord needs to know. The questions I do answer, they aggravate them. A woman once said to me, "You do things that are not written in books." And I said to her, "There is a book being written by the Lord, and what I have done and the reasons why I've done them are in that book." Soon, I will be burnt. I will be called a witch, a sorcerer, a heretic. They have not told me that yet. I just know.
Thank you, Joe. Our third guest lived 800 years ago. He was born Giovanni Francesco Bernardoni into a wealthy family, but he rejected wealth for a simple and very ascetic lifestyle. He founded the Franciscan Order of Friars, and he was the first person in recorded history to receive a special mark of favor from Jesus Christ, as you will hear. Because he's known for his fondness for animals, in 1980, Pope John Paul II termed him the patron saint of ecologists, St. Francis of Assisi.
My brothers and sisters in Christ, I've come to talk to you today a little bit about where I have come from and what I stand for. And when this is done, you will know me better, and perhaps you will be a better person. I was born in Umbria, northern Italy, in 1181. I was born to wealthy parents, and I knew all the pleasures that wealth could bring. And as a young man, I was a master of the sword. I drank to excess. I debauched with women. I ate and ate and ate. I knew all the pleasures of the body. But there came a time, as the city-states in which we lived in those days went warring among each other, that I was captured, and I was kept in prison for a year. And during that time, I turned my thoughts inward and learned more about myself, the world, and God. I had a dream. And in that dream, I recognized that solitude was one of the key virtues. And so I went out by myself and wandered the hills around my home. I spoke to the animals. I taught the gospel of the Lord to the birds. Anyone who would listen, any animal who would listen, I spoke and shared what I knew from the book. I knew the Bible, and I tried to teach the gospel according to Jesus. I came upon a leper. The man reviled me. His body was covered with pustules and sores. And I stepped back. And then I knew that this was my opportunity to show what was in my heart, the love I had for my fellow man. And I embraced this man, and I hugged him, and I emptied my purse and gave to the poor. And then and there I had an awakening. I knew how good that charity was. I took a pilgrimage to Rome. His Holiness Pope Innocent III was there. I tried to visit with him. I was unable to do so. But I recognized that the people were not supporting with their money and their heart the Holy See. So I, with the beggars and the poor, stood on the steps of the Holy Basilica, and I fasted with the poor. And I shared what little I had with them, and I had a dream. And the dream said, "Go and build my house." And I returned home, and I went to St. Damian's Church, and with my own hands I labored and rebuilt that church to its glory. Some of you may not understand this in today's modern world, but I heard voices. Voices from on high, and I knew that the angels were speaking to me. When I returned from my year's labor, I had lost weight, I was dirty, I was filthy, and I was penniless. And I came to my father, and he looked at me, and he was embarrassed and humiliated. He seized me, and he placed me in a dungeon. And before I could get out of that dungeon, he made me forego my inheritance. It didn't matter to me. I didn't need any money. Poverty was something I understood. And I said to him, "Before this, you were my father, but now my Father art in heaven." And from that point forward, I devoted myself to the Lord. I gave up my clothes and wore the vestments you see now, the rough wool of an Umbrian peasant. And I walked the hills and I preached. Again, anyone who would hear me. Mostly the poor, sometimes just the animals. I tried to form a group of monks to devote themselves to the church. The Pope would not grant me recognition, but I understood and I worked harder. I developed and organized a group of ladies. We called them the Poor Ladies. You know them today as the Poor Clares. And they were a cloistered order. Ultimately, they became formalized by the church. It was then that in a dream, Christ appeared to me. And he spoke to me from his heart to mine, from his mind to mine, and I understood. I vowed that I would form an order of brothers with three principles: obedience, poverty, and chastity. The most important being poverty. Only then can you understand the suffering of others. Only then will you know what it's like to go hungry and to feel the pain and to understand the beauty that comes from in here when you understand God. The angels appeared to me again, and the seraphim said to me, "You will receive a special blessing from the Lord." And I did. And when I awoke, I bore the stigmata that remained with me for the rest of my life. The 5 marks of the cross, the nails through my feet, through my wrists, and the lance below my heart. It wasn't there when I went to bed, and it was there when I got up. The marks, the bleeding. There is only one way that could happen, and that is from the Lord entering me and my spirit. In October of 1226, Sister Death took me. I was buried secretly. And in 1818, my body was found and removed to a place of consecrated burial because people understood that I had been beatified and was sainted. I didn't view myself in that sense, but just the same, others viewed me that way. I wanted any beggar with whom I would dine to be able to say he was not embarrassed or humiliated because of his clothes compared to mine. I wanted him to be at home with me. And so it was. My goal was to rekindle God in the minds of men. Brother John will pass the collection plate, and I hope that you give from your heart. Thank you.
Thank you, St. Francis. Our final distinguished historical visitor today was made famous for a new generation by a 1962 movie in which he was portrayed by a woman who is currently a resident of Coeur d'Alene, Patty Duke. But Helen Keller was famous a long time before The Miracle Worker. In 1902, she published The Story of My Life, which is still in print. In 1904, in an era in which most women didn't even attend college, she managed to graduate from Radcliffe, which is the sister college of Harvard. And all she did for the rest of her life was spend 64 years until her death serving various charitable causes. Please let me introduce Helen Keller.
My name is Helen Adams Keller, and I'm here to tell you a story. A story about admiration, courage, and the strength of the human spirit. It is my story, but it is my friends who have made the story of my life. for they have turned my limitations into beautiful privileges and allowed me to walk serene and happy in the shadow cast by my deprivation. This shadow took a form of a fever at a very early age when I was merely 19 months old. The fever took from me the light from my eyes and the sounds from my ears, leaving me in perpetual silence and eternal darkness. Now, some have said, what a devastating destiny. However, I disagree, for everything has its wonders, even darkness and silence. And I have found that whatever state I may be in, to therein be content, and ultimately optimistic, because optimism is the faith to achievement. And besides, who ever heard of a pessimist discovering the secrets to the stars, or sailing uncharted seas, or even opening new heavens to the human spirit? It is this optimism which has motivated my ambition from the very day that I was born. I have always wished to do great and noble tasks, but it has instead been my duty to achieve smaller tasks as if they were great and noble. These smaller tasks include some of your everyday easy activities, and one of my greatest challenges, obviously, was communication. For the first couple of years after the fever, it was the darkest days of my life. I refer to them now as the dark black wooden box days, because it was as if I was trapped in a dark, heavy, black wooden box, and surrounding me on all sides were the people who cared about me. They were trying to look in and yearning to hear what it is I had to say, and wishing they knew how to get me out. But of course, nobody knew. And for 5 long years, I stayed there in that wooden box. It wasn't until my most beloved friend and devoted teacher, Miss Annie Sullivan, came to us that I finally was able to break free from that wooden box. But there is one thing you must understand before I go on with my story. You see, I was not a sweet child. In fact, all that frustration from being held in this black box, well, the only fun that I ever knew was in mischief. And some of my fondest childhood memories are of that mischief. In fact, I remember days when the cook and her daughter, we would get in so much trouble, and she was easy to fight, too. I recall one day, in fact, when we took turns cutting off each other's curls. I would have been bald if my mother had not stepped in time. But the best memory I have of my childhood mischief was the day that I learned how to use a key. My mother was in the pantry, and on the counter there was an object, and I picked it up, and I realized what it was, and somehow I figured out how to use it. I locked my mother in the pantry for 3 hours that day. And I sat with my head against the door and felt the vibration of her constant pounding. It made me giggle, and still does to this day. But it is this last memory that brings me back to Annie Sullivan, because it wasn't even a day that she was with us that my mother handed me a small object to take to her. And as I was walking up the stairs towards her room, I realized what it was. And of course, being a small child, it was very tempting not to do it. You know, lock her in her room. So when I got to the stairs, I slammed the door and I locked it. And I hid the key beside the wardrobe. It was my father had to put up a ladder and get her out from the window. It was something that I still find funny today. And I didn't return the key until months later. So as you see, Annie's job was not an easy one. For not only did she have to teach a deaf-mute child to learn, but she had to conquer disobedience. After many battles, Annie and I finally came to an understanding, and she began to teach me language. She taught me letters using a finger alphabet. She would hold my hand like this and place her hand in my palm and make letters. I would cup my hand around hers and feel the shape, and then imitate it. At first, I thought it was merely a game. I didn't understand that each letter meant a word, and that each word meant an object. But then one day, it came to me as clear as ever. Annie and I were walking to the well house, and someone was drawing water from it. She had me stick my hand under the water and hold my other hand up so that she may sign me a word. And as the water rushed through my fingers, she signed the word water into my hand. She repeated this until suddenly I understood. It was amazing. My soul was set free. And we left the well house that day, and I wanted to know the name of everything. I ran to a tree and patted it, asking, begging to know what the name of it was. I wanted to know the name of the grass and the clouds and the little thing that just moved in the grass. I wanted to know it all. It was the most exhilarating day of my life, and it started me out on an extraordinary journey. Soon, I was writing and reading by Braille. Oh, reading. Reading is the key to my vision, you see, because it is through books that I can see wonderful sunsets and watch the moon come out at night, and nights riding horseback across the beach. It is amazing because I can actually see them inside my head. But my biggest and most admirable accomplishment to this date would be getting into college, because in the late 1800s, it was not unheard of that a woman were to attend college, let alone a woman with my disabilities. And not only did I want to go to college, I wanted to go to the only college that didn't want me. In fact, I wanted to go to Harvard, but since Harvard wouldn't accept women, well, I had to go to the annex of Harvard, which was then known as Radcliffe. I attended Radcliffe for the first 3 years, but it was not without some serious problems that I had to get in. When I took my exams, they made Annie, who has been with me all the way, sit outside, and instead I had a different interpreter. Annie had to sit outside, as I said, and the interpreter that was in the room, he didn't know me and he couldn't help me. So it was tough, but I passed. In fact, I got the highest score in English of any candidate at Radcliffe or Harvard. Yet they still made me wait 4 years before I could attend. And in the year of 1900, I finally was able to accomplish the dream of going to college. I also had time during my sophomore and junior year at Radcliffe to write a book entitled The Story of My Life. And in June of this year, 1904, I will graduate with honors from Radcliffe. I will be the first blind deaf woman to ever receive a college degree. And as for my future, well, I don't know, and I'm not going to speculate, because life is a succession of lessons that must be lived to be understood. And it is either a daring adventure or nothing at all. And as for my disabilities, well, I thank God every day for my handicaps, because they have made me what I am today. And besides, the miracle of the human experience would lose something great if there were no limitations to overcome. And so I leave you with this. The hilltop hour would not be so wonderful if there were no dark valleys to traverse.
Thank you, Ms. Keller. Our guests from history would welcome your questions. They should be able to answer from their seats with the handheld mics. And we would ask that you stand up so we can hear you and also make it clear to whom you're addressing your question. So please, the floor is open for your questions. Don't be intimidated. They're just regular people. Yes, ma'am.
The question is, do I feel that I have had some type of inner vision or that I'm a prophet? And I want to assure you that I am no guru and I am no leader. If you would follow me, you would find me chasing butterflies at any moment. I can't stay in a straight line. The message is simple. It doesn't take a lot of complication, and it doesn't take a lot of study to look within yourself and see how to love others, how to give to others, to see the value of yourself. It is not difficult. I've spent my time in academia. I've spent my time teaching and reading books. I've spent my time traveling the world, and yet it's so simple that anyone can do it. You need do none of those things to really know how to love and to look around you and to find people to give your love to. Thanks for your question.
Yes, please.
I could not tell you when the Braille system was developed. It was in place before I was ever introduced to it. But I could tell you where I learned the hand alphabet and where that came from, if you wanted to know that. Spanish monks who were sworn to silence created it to communicate with others.
I have a question for St. Francis. Were you ever reconciled with your family? Did they ever accept your calling?
No, my father abandoned me, and I lived my life that way, and I devoted myself to God, and that was sufficient.
I'd be interested if I could have a follow-up. St. Francis, I understood you to say that you rejected your earthly father in favor of your heavenly one.
Well, precisely, my father in heaven, not on earth.
Right.
Yes.
I'd be interested to know what Dr. Buscalia feels about that. You preach love here and now. We need to love one another. And yet St. Francis rejected earthly love.
Well, I certainly think that you could never reject your father, someone who's given you as much as your father. It may be difficult to always understand what he had given you, or it may seem as everything came from beyond him, and yet what you are, so much of that comes from your father. What a father can do to show the strength when you had the poverty that you had, and when you were speaking to the animals, and where did you find that strength? And it must have come from an earlier time. It must have come from your father.
There was a monk that you know, Gregor Mendel. He experimented in the early days of science and determined that we are what our parents made us, and I am what my parents made me. But my father was not a loving man. Putting me in prison, starving me, beating me are not the kind of blessings that one normally likes. When he made me give up my inheritance, and in those days, of course, the firstborn male heir got it all, I gave it up. No, I did not love him, but I did not hate him either, if that matters at all. But no, we did not reconcile. I have love in my heart for the animals, for the people, for the entire world.
There was a question right here, I think. Ma'am, right here in the second.
This is also for St. Francis. When was it that you did establish your monastery, and where is that?
Well, actually, I didn't establish the monastery as you know monasteries today. The Franciscans, as you know, are not cloistered, though the Poor Clares are. We do our work in the fields. We work with people. When the Spanish came to the New World, many Franciscans came with them. We're used to rolling up our sleeves and doing hard work. And one of the things that we have rejected, and that I have rejected, is book learning for book learning's sake. You see, we take a vow of poverty, and in that regard, we cannot afford these handwritten manuscripts. So we don't have books. The people who went and took the vows that I suggested that they take, they learned only what they needed to know for their particular job. And if they were going to farm, that's all they needed to know. They didn't have to know the rest. So their life was simplistic, and the order began at that point in time, and it was much after I was gone that it developed into what you know today and the friars that you see enrobed as I am enrolled.
Yes, please.
This is also from St. Francis. I was actually just wondering, do you think that animals have souls in that way you preach to? Do you think?
Animals have souls only in the sense that they are good and they are virtuous. They do not have souls as we have souls. There is a difference, but that doesn't mean that they should not have our kindness and our love. And that is what I gave to them. And in the beginning, they were the only ones that listened to me.
I have a question for St. Joan. As I listen to St. Francis and your connection with animals and your obvious deep faith in God, I was struck during your account, Joan, by a couple of things. It seems to me that a number of people must have expressed a lot of skepticism about two things: that you actually heard voices from saints, and that you knew anything about how to run an army. Could you speak about those?
I come from a period in France where so much of the hopelessness causes people to look for an answer. And I honestly felt that many of the people who followed me followed in desperation. Whether they believed me or not, I knew that in the end they would know. But I do believe that the majority of them followed me. They respected me for my piety, my love of God, because I shared that with them. But I gave them hope. And I think above everything else, it was that hope that they all congregated for.
And what was it like when you were handed command of an army?
It was difficult. I was not raised to be a military person. I was raised to herd sheep. I was given an army, and all I knew is that the Lord was going to guide me. And in his guidance, I knew how to appreciate the leaders of the army who already were in power. I was their inspiration. Their military tactic already existed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Question all the way in the back, please.
Good question, Joan. How were you captured? How long were you in prison before execution? And what were the conditions of your prison?
I was captured at a time when I had very few men to support me. I still felt I was thriving to help the villagers of these different places in northern France. And I was captured simply on a ride away from a village. Once I was captured, I was taken and put in prison for about 4 months, and it has been about that 4th month period that we are now, and I have very little time left.
What were the conditions?
Conditions? There were none. A dark cell, no windows, very little food. I was punished often, so it was quite torturous.
Yes, right here, please. This question is for St. Joan. Why did the king pull away from you?
I didn't expect it. I expected him to allow me to lead his armies to unify all of France. When he received his throne, as many kings do, he became spoiled. He decided that he needed to make treaties and to act as a king does. He let go of the true path that we were on.
Yes.
This question is for Helen. Helen, I have seen many sunsets. Would you describe sunset for me?
A sunset is a beautiful thing, and in my mind, a sunset is like golden butter, and it is hard to describe, but I'll try. It is like all the gold in the world that sits on a line, and slowly it sinks into the sand and melts away. That is a sunset.
Helen, I have a question. You described your years living inside a dark box. Could you describe for us the moment when Annie Sullivan spells into your hand and you make the connection with water?
Well, I'm not exactly sure how it all happened, but as I said, we were walking to the well, and the water was rushing through my hand on this side, and on the other side, she spelled the word water, W-A-T-E-R, into my hand. And she started off slowly, W-A-T-E-R. And she got faster and faster, and something in me clicked, and I remembered. Because before I was ill, I could make the sound wah-wah, and I knew that it meant water. So water is a very symbolic word for me.
Yes.
I'm curious, after hearing Thomas Jefferson's ideas this morning on how romantic love and marriage is not important, what's important in other things, convenience and rightness and so forth. And I'm wondering, and I'm not going to call on any particular person, but I'm wondering on what this panel, the different members, think of the importance of romantic love and marriage today,
So who would like to take that?
and your day, I suppose.
The importance of romantic love in your lives. St. Francis?
For me and my brethren, there is no romantic love. The body is not necessarily to engage in those types of pursuits. Not as though I did not understand them, because I did. But I gave them up for a greater love, a better love, an eternal love. And it has kept me in good stead with my Lord.
I feel that love that he speaks of, it's a loyalty to my God. I did not experience romantic love either, nor will I, but feel that the loyalty and the love that I have for my Lord prevails.
But Dr. Bruscalia, you must think romantic love's important.
Of course I do. To me, there is only one love. There are many degrees of this love, but there is only one love. And where I learned it was in a family, with my mama and papa and my sisters and my brother. And we were always around the table, and they piled up pasta. Some of these other forms of love, although I believe they exist and I believe they come from the same place, but we have to learn how love is actualized and how it's brought forward. And it's great to have ideas of love, but you need to do things. You need to take love and make it into something so that it transfers and passes on to someone else. Ideas of love are great, and we could use all that we could get, but romantic love in a family, a man and a woman falling in love, that's special. That's very, very special. And I'm so blessed to have Mom and Papa to teach that to me in my life.
Miss Keller, working as you did for years with Annie Sullivan, you must, both of you must have developed a deep affection and understanding for one another.
Yes, Annie was my most beloved friend, and oftentimes people asked us how we would live without one another. And after much thought, I could not imagine living without her. In fact, I recall the day that I asked her what love was, And it was a very hard thing for me to understand because there wasn't an object to show with the word. And she described it to me as everything that makes you happy and makes you feel whole. And that is why Annie Sullivan is love to me.
Thank you. Yes, right here, sir.
Call me anything.
Why did your father leave you, your mother and brother in New York and you on to California? Why did he stay there with them?
That's a good question. The question is, why did my father leave and go to California? He had a ticket. He had to find work. He had to support the family, and he did not know how long they would be quarantined on Ellis Island. This was very common back then when immigrants came to this country, that they were at the mercy of immigration officials, and there was much less check and balance on that. And of course, my brother did have the measles, so there was some reason to keep him there quarantined. But my father went on, and I've wondered the same thing in your question, as your question. What was it that propelled them apart? And I think it was the sense that they could come back together, that they would find each other, that they would simply reunite, and they knew that they would do that. Otherwise, they couldn't have.
Yes.
Yeah, this would be for Ms. Keller. On love, I heard you experienced more than romantic love, that you actually were quite physical, almost to the point of being promiscuous.
Well, sir, I assure you that that is only a rumor. I am not permitted by society's views to even be in love with a man because of my disabilities. And so, love for me is simply like a breeze in the flowers. It is there, but I cannot have it.
Yes. The question is for Helen Keller. How is it that you came to live those years inside a dark box?
I got very sick, and the sickness made me lose my sight and my hearing. And so I was in a box because I couldn't see anyone and I couldn't hear anyone.
Right.
Yes.
Yes.
Sorry. I'm sorry.
Not a literal box. Yes, please. Dr. Buscali. Yes, Leo. Yes.
Have you been able to make a successful love relationship?
Has Leo Buscaglia had a successful love relationship in his own life?
Long lasting.
Yes, many. Hundreds. I think I know the meaning of your question. And just as others on this panel have other ideas of love, I have mine too, and many of them relate to having relationships with many people and knowing many people, and love in the form of friendship and acts of friendship and goodwill to each other. And I think that's the best way for me to answer your question.
Yes, ma'am.
Joan, I'd like to know what the people were so afraid of when they imprisoned you and decided that your fate should be burning at the stake because you were just one girl. What were they so afraid of?
I believe that the common man looked upon my trial and tribulations as being a farce. It was the people in power who were most intimidated by me. In a land that is suffering so much, when someone like me comes forth and gives hope, it also is intimidating to the people who are supposed to provide hope for those people. And so I was and still am an intimidating force to not only the clergy, but also to the ruling classes of both France and England.
Joan, as you're aware, you're about to be martyred for the Lord. I'm wondering, St. Francis, it seems to me that I read somewhere that you wanted to be a martyr also, or that your lifestyle almost amounts to martyrdom.
That's true, and that is, frankly, because I have devoted myself to the Lord's work. But you see, I have discovered perfect joy. And when I passed from this life, I knew perfect joy. I had all the love. I had everything that God could bestow upon me. My life was perfect. And there's nothing left but to live in heaven with God.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, this question is for Dr. Love. I was just curious on your views regarding the body chemistry, when love at first sight, or that term, how you feel about that term?
How does Dr. Buscaglia feel about falling in love at first sight?
Well, when you have the Guinness Book of World Records for hugging people, as I have, certainly there's an attraction. Each person is special and each person is unique, and each person has their own special attraction. Sometimes they don't even know they have it. They're waiting to give their love to other people, or they don't think people will love them. But they will. People will be attracted to each individual for their uniqueness, and they just need to look within themselves and have that specialness and that uniqueness come out. So I definitely believe in love at first sight and second sight and third sight and every sight. But definitely there is that chemistry between people.
Leon, my dear friend, we will not hug this time. What's your opinion on violence in school?
His view of violence in the schools.
Well, something's wrong, obviously, Ken. When we have this much violence, something's wrong. And we need to try to figure out what that is. I've been gone a couple of years now, and I haven't, I've only now that I've come back to you know of some of these recent incidents. And they're very troubling. They're very troubling indeed. I started my Love 101 class because a student in that class committed suicide. A young person taking their life for no reason. 8,000 suicides a year in this country. And it just propelled me. I didn't know what to do. We teach them all these things. Look at this school. Look at this campus. Dozens of buildings. Big buildings. Lots of money. Lots of educated people. And we don't teach people what they are, what they're worth, who they are. And I don't understand this. I don't understand how we can miss what people are and how important they are. And obviously, if people strike out and take another person's life, your own is terrible. Another is terrible. What's the difference? Taking a life that has so much promise is terrible. And we need to find out in places where we're teaching people, teaching young people about each other, how can this happen? It's almost the holiest of places. How can this happen? So we must search for that answer.
Should we allow physical contact and hugging among teachers and students?
Oh my gosh, you're asking an Italian that. Of course, we have to. We have to allow physical contact. And I wouldn't want the Guinness Book of World Records for the most harassment cases. But I think that it's very important. People, when people come to me to be hugged, you can tell. You have to see if the person wants to be touched. And it's very important to not want to touch them because it's important for you, but to understand, do they need that touch, and do they respond to it, and are they receptive to it? And you look at them and you'll know. You'll see it there. You just have to look.
Yes? Joan of Arc, were you scared?
That's a very good question. I was very scared. I am still human. I still had the fears and the anxieties that all human beings would have. I faced war. And I had to do it with courage. And I think the only thing that got me through that was knowing that the Lord was with me. But I was scared.
Yes.
Yes, Miss Keller there. You couldn't see, nor could you hear. How did you ever talk?
We used a technique that was first developed in India, and it wasn't even sure to work. In fact, my teacher, Anne Sullivan, didn't want me to learn to speak because she feared that I would fail. But I assured her that I wouldn't. It's a technique in which I felt the inside of my speech teacher's mouth, feeling the placement of her tongue and lips and jaw as she spoke.
Yes.
This is for Joan. What happened to your parents?
What happened to Joan's parents?
My parents lived past the time of the English coming into Domlemy. My mother lived to a good age. I tried to visit them before I was captured, but was only allowed home one time. And so at this point, with me on my way, I know that they will live past me.
Were they supportive of you?
They were fearful. It actually took some time for them to realize that I was on a mission.
I'd be interested to know, Joan and Francis, obviously both of you serve the Lord, but setting that aside, as important as that is, setting that aside in a secular sense, I'd like to know from all four of you, who or what do you think you represent? Animals, the French, the disabled, people who hug? Who or what do you represent other than the Lord?
I think that if I am to stand for anything, it's love of mankind and love of the Lord. That is the deep-seated love, not the intimate love that I had known in my youth. And it is that which is, I think, the greatest thing. And I guess that's what I tried to preach, love of fellow man.
And Joan?
I represent hope. The people of France were at a point where they had no hope. They didn't see anything improving. And when my call came, it was hope that I gave the people. And it changed the history of France forever.
Ms. Keller, do you represent the disabled in any way?
Of course I represent the disabled, but I also represent anyone who is in need because I've devoted my life to helping those that are in need.
And Leo?
Well, I think I represent the idea that love is simpler than we make it. It is not so complicated that we should give to others, and we should give it to ourselves. There's so much within us that needs to be loved, and we need to look toward that. And I would be remiss if I didn't say that I also represent Tulio and Rosa, without whom I would not be here today.
We have time for one more question, if there are any. Yes.
This is for Ms. Keller. Can you say a little bit about how you devoted your life to people in need? Just what it was you did.
At age 10, I saved a little deaf, blind boy from a homeless shelter, which was a horrible shelter, and there was animal-like conditions. And we needed to raise some money for him to get a teacher because I wanted him to be able to experience what I experienced with Annie Sullivan. And so at age 10, I wrote letters to the president and to my good friend, Mr. Alexander Graham Bell, and Mark Twain until we had enough money to pay for a teacher for him until he was grown.
Thank you. We've reached the part in the program where our distinguished historical visitors step out of character. I'd like to introduce all four of them. Please hold on to your applause until I've introduced all four, but please also understand these people have put months of preparation into these characters, and they deserve some appreciation. Steve Ruppel played Leo Buscaglia. Joan of Arc was played by Charlotte Chittick Trainer. Harvey Richmond was St. Francis, and as Helen Keller, Nikki Pillen. we start with three sort of standard questions for these people. I'd like each of you to respond, starting with St. Francis, or rather Harvey. Could you introduce yourself? Who are you? Second, what drew you to portraying this particular character today? And third, how has preparing for your character affected you personally?
My name is Harvey Richmond. I'm a notary public. I run a horse ranch, and I'm the consummate fly fisherman. Notwithstanding, I was drafted into this position as St. Francis because Tony ordered me to do it. I didn't pick it. And what I've learned, most interestingly, is after reading the Catholic Encyclopedia and 3 or 4 other books on St. Francis, the Catholic perspective on this entirety. And I say that because I'm not Catholic, so I've learned a great deal, and perhaps I'm a better man for it. I don't know.
Charlotte?
My name is Charlotte Chittick Trainer, and I teach history here at NIC, World Civilizations, also Native American peoples. Joan of Arc was chosen for me by Tony, and I loved it. It was a time period that I'm very familiar with. It was also an individual that I found I had so much respect for because of her loyalty and her dedication. And in a world where we experience fleeting relationships and fleeting loyalties, it was amazing to see the dedication and the sacrifice that a woman would make. And I felt I really grew from learning more about her than I did know.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Steve?
My name's Steve Ruppel. I'm an administrator here, administer computer services on the campus, and this is the third time I've done characters. I should say, since other people have mentioned this, how this came about. I mentioned, since I was talking to Tony one day, and he said he was doing a day on love, I said, well, you got to have Leo Buscaglia. You got to find an Italian-American somewhere in the community to play Leo Buscaglia. And of course, Tony said, well, if I can't find one, or you could do that. And so a transformation took place. But I think one of the things, I admired Leo Buscaglia. I picked the character or thought of him because of seeing him 25 years ago and admired what he was talking about then. I did not stay in touch with his whole career until now, and so it was nice to get back and read and see what the legacy was. And very much of what he did was the same throughout his life. And I think what affected me the most was thinking about my grandparents who were immigrants and what it was like for them to come over to this country and raise a large family and not on much money, and what that was like for them. So it meant a lot to me.
Nikki?
My name's Nikki, and I'm a theater major here at NIC, and I don't know Tony, so he had no involvement in this. I actually attended a theater meeting on one of the first days of class, and they said they needed a Helen Keller, and I knew that I couldn't be in any of the plays this year because I work and I couldn't do the schedule, and I wanted to do something theatrical, so I took it on and decided to do Helen Keller. And I really didn't know anything about her, and I'd watched The Miracle Worker, and that was about it. And as I ended up reading 3 books of research and tons and tons of quotes off the internet. And I really have so much respect for this woman. She's remarkable. I don't know how else to describe the things that she accomplished in her life. And I can only hope that I'm as ambitious as she is.
Thanks again to these 4 people. Thanks to Tony, who pushed at least 3 of these 4 people into it. Thanks to you for attending, and don't forget evaluation forms, but do hold on for one moment. Apparently there's one more.
I have a question for Steve. That is the most magnificent beard I've seen.
Thank you very much. Yes, this is how he looked throughout his whole life.
Well, yours is better.
There's your. Yes. Did you write your own scripts or?
If it be a script, yes.
Yes.
This, see, a lot of people don't know this, but I was privileged to receive from the Vatican an actual picture taken of St. Francis near Assisi just before his death. The photograph showed him with a monk's fringe. Well, I wasn't going to shave my head. So this is to simulate the skull cap appearance. And contrary to popular belief, St. Francis did have a mustache.
Yes, sir.
Have you seen the movie Messenger?
Yes, I have.
Do you think that's an accurate portrayal of Joan of Arc?
You know, it's amazing. I've seen all of them. There are 5 out, and actually I've watched the 3 of them more recently. And it's amazing how each one of them do grab an essence, but then there's a Hollywoodized production that kind of takes away from it. And then you see another movie, one with Lily. It came out right about the same time as The Messenger, and it actually took some of the more realistic aspects of Joan's life that weren't in the other movies. So anybody who's interested in Joan of Arc, I would say to watch all of them to get the essence. But the most powerful text really for Joan is the transcripts from her trial. And that's what the majority of my research came from, was from her personal testimony.
Yes. Tony.
And please do not forget that Kevin King tonight, we have another panel of different people, and also Thomas Jefferson will be with us. So hope you'll be here all week, and you're hardly Jewish. You're wonderful. As we enter the 4th decade of the Popcorn Forum, we keep doing it because of you. I got a ring from a lady that maybe because of her illness, she started 31 years ago with it, so people come back and back. Try to come back tonight. We think it's very, very nice.
Don't forget the evaluation forms, please. Thank you.